Hey, everybody. I'm excited to chat with you today about identifying opportunities to make meaningful improvements to your product. Now, this session is all about identifying metrics moving product opportunities. Not everything you have to do moves a metric, but in this lecture, in this session, that's what we're going to be talking about. So, welcome and thanks for joining. Let's talk a little bit about the outline. So we'll go over a little bit of background and context, and then we'll talk a little bit about the framework that I've used to have success in identifying these opportunities, walk through a few case studies, and then wrap up with the takeaways. So before we dive in, I want to set a little bit of context on why this is important and what you should learn from this. So why is this important? Well, as product managers, it's a key skill and a core part of our job to identify and find new ways to drive impact, right? And it's not always easy. And we often have a lot of different stakeholders giving us ideas, asking us to do things, making requests. But what we really need to do is think about what's right for the product, what opportunities are out there, and how can we drive impact on our product and ultimately create better experiences for users. And I want to make sure everybody understands that point really well. It's not just about driving metrics impact and moving numbers up and to the right. At the end of the day, it is important to actually solve a real problem, right? It's important to actually build something meaningful and build something that people want, they use, they love. So the set of framework and tools that I'll share with you is not a silver bullet, and nothing is, right? Product management is all about kind of navigating the uncertainty. And I hope that this lesson helps you identify a few different product opportunities that you feel confident in to drive impact, right? And as you think about this framework, please note that you'll have to make adjustments for your own product, right? And it's not going to be a perfect solution, but this is what has helped me, and this is what I believe you can use to get started in shipping impactful improvements. I'm Brady Simpson, so I'll be kind of guiding you through this next 15 to 20 minutes. I'm currently a product manager at LinkedIn. I work on the messaging app. And for the last 3 years, I've been the founder of my own startup in consumer technology. But prior to that, I was at Facebook, where I won 2 awards for this exact type of work, identifying product opportunities, that we will cover later on in this presentation through the case study section. And as I mentioned, you will have to make adjustments to your product area, but this is something that you can apply to any product, any line of thinking, or any area. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the framework. What is the framework? Why is it necessary? And how do we approach it? So the framework is loosely called UI-Me, right? And this is basically something that many of you have heard before, which is understand, identify, and execute. We'll cover the exact steps in the coming slides. But before we do, let's break down why a framework and how should we use it. So the framework is not meant to be a rigid, structure for you to follow and do exactly. Using frameworks in product management is good because we have to remember a lot of different things as we're working with research and data and other designers and product managers and leads and leadership, right? We have a lot of different stakeholders that we manage, oftentimes a lot of different products. Oftentimes we're moving in many different areas of the company. But having a framework can be a really great mental kind of internal tool for everyone to kind of orient themselves. And so that's what it's all about. Orient yourself around this framework, let it guide your path, but don't make it the only thing that you do. Don't feel like it has to be super rigid. Make sure you're flexible, make sure you're open, and adjust it accordingly for your own needs. Understand, identify, market size, and execute. As I mentioned, it's a pretty common framework, UIE, but I added the M in there, not only because it makes it a little bit easier to remember UI, me, right? But because the market sizing piece is so important, and we'll cover that in a second as well. So let's talk about the first piece of the framework, right? The whole, idea here is we want to go through some sort of loose process to then come up with a list of potential ideas that could help us drive impact for our product. So in this first piece, we're going to be talking about the understand phase. So as a product manager, when you're going through this, the first thing you want to understand is your goal. What goal or metric is your team, your company, your product trying to move? What are you trying to do? Right? You might be trying to increase sharing or revenue or retention or click-through rates, right? There's something that your team cares about, that you're trying to optimize for, that your leadership really cares about. So before you do anything, make sure you understand the goal you're actually trying to optimize. And in the understand phase, at a high level, what you want to do is internalize, but also write down everything you know about the product that will be helpful in the process. And so typically what you'll want to do is understand the main problems that people might have with your product. Are there known issues? Are there really big gaps, right? Are there areas that we know are leading to a drop in activations or a drop in retention, right? Whatever your goals are, make sure you understand the problems, the main problems that flow into that goal. Additionally, it's really important for you to understand your data. Work with your data scientist, learn SQL, learn Python, pull some of the data yourself, understand the distributions. How are people using the product? Across what platforms? In what countries? Right? What operating systems? Whatever the important slices and dices are for your product, make sure you know that. Maybe if you work at Airbnb, it's understanding, the distributions of hosts versus guests, and then, hosts versus guests across country or demographic or, days on the platform, etc. So make sure you know the data that is important to your product and to the goals that you're trying to serve. So write those down. You don't have to be exhaustive, but make sure you get some of the main data down so that you can internalize what your product is all about. Understand some of the motivations. Why do people come to your product? Why do they download your app? What are they trying to do? What's the job that they have to do? This is really important. Don't just understand the problems, but understand people's motivations to use your product in the first place. And look at the user feedback, right? Talk to your researchers. Do some surveys. Look at past research. This is a time for you to just kind of understand what's happening with your product in regards to your goals and everything else. And look at some of these past experiments too. Many times we have lots of companies that are several years old with many different experiments under their belts, but there's no area or place you can go to necessarily find those. It's important to find those. Reach out to people. Try to understand why something worked or why something didn't work, right? What are those different levers? And we'll talk about that in a second, but it's really important to understand some of your past experiments at the company in order to inform the next stage of this process. And lastly, I have upstream versus downstream impact as well. Understand what type of, network effects that some of these past experiments or even pieces of your product have. Right? If we know that, for example, on Facebook, having more friends eventually means you will post or you will be retentive or you will click on more ads, that's important to know. Okay. So in this section, as we wrap up and move on to the next one, it's really important for you to really just understand your goals and your data. And some tips on the understand piece. Really narrow your focus to a specific goal or metric you're trying to move. Don't necessarily try to be exhaustive. There's always going to be more opportunity and you can come back and do this again later. Create a shared doc. This is really important. Don't feel like you have to put all of this together and that you have to be the only expert. Ask your cross-functional partners to help contribute to this too. And on that last piece, hopefully you have access to other cross-functional partners that might be able to help round out some of the first understand phase. So let's talk about the second step, identify. So identify is all about trying to identify potential ideas that could move your metric, that could be impactful, that could be better on the experience side. So let's talk through some of these different things that you will need to do to identify potential opportunities. By now, you've already learned all about your product and your goal and your data. So that should help inform kind of what else you want to be doing, right? And you should be able to look at some different levers, right? What are the different things that we can push or pull within our product to potentially affect our goal, our metric, okay? So make sure you identify what those levers are in the company on the product. You might be able to look at some of those past experiments to do so. Are there any heuristics? Are there any kind of known heuristics that you can rely on to help improve your product and identify new opportunities? For example, do we have a specific number of friends on Facebook that you need to be retentive? Probably. Do we know how many trips that a user needs to take on Uber to be retentive and continue using the product? Probably. Are these things that we can push and pull to drive the impact that we need to? Probably. Let's talk about small and large percentages, right? So thinking about your product and different opportunities, one potential way to orient and think about ideas is making a large number move a little bit, a small number move a lot. And I'll show you an example and a little bit more of that in the next slide. You'll want to set up a brainstorm, right? Think about all the different ideas that you and your team can come up with based on your data, based on the understand phase through brainstorm. You might have some intuition about a product experience or something else. You might have good hypotheses that you can test. Are there specific bugs that you could potentially fix to increase impact? Are they blocking any major flows? Are things not connected? Are you not supporting a particular platform or operating system or browser? Is there anything you could potentially optimize, or are there new products you could create? The entire goal for this identify phase is really all about coming up with a short list that you can use to then potentially weigh the options on and prioritize to drive impact. So let's talk about the large versus small percentages idea. If you move 10 million, 1%, that is 100,000, right? Similarly, if you 100x or even 10x 100,000, you could be doing 1 million or 10 million, right? So when you're thinking about this particular concept, is there a new platform that you could grow into, right? Is there a new space, a new country, a new use case that you can serve that is really small right now but has a lot of potential? It might be a lot easier to move that significantly. Similarly, is there something that you are already doing really, really well, right? Is there a concept or product or feature that people are already doing a lot of that you could potentially help them do more of? That could be one kind of tip or trick to impacting product metrics. But remember to make sure it always flows into your goal and is always solving a real problem. So let's talk about some execution tips for this second phase. Create a list, right? Create a numbered short list of ideas that you could potentially work on. Not everything has to be novel and new. Some of the best ideas are ones that make sense. So ensure these ideas could actually impact the goals and metrics. Your goal isn't to come up with a bunch of random ideas, but you actually want something that has a chance of improving the experience, improving the goal, and improving what you're trying to optimize for. Some traps: don't just rely on the data, okay? The data won't necessarily just jump out with answers. And just because something has worked in the past doesn't necessarily mean it will work in the future or now or in this case. Another tip is to really just have a single unified location of this list, of this opportunity, right? You don't want to be working across 100 different documents that nobody knows how to navigate or how to find. So create a single, cohesive, consolidated place. So we're going to move on to the third piece to this framework. So this third phase, you, I, me. So this is the M, market sizing. It's also called opportunity sizing. It's also called impact sizing, projection sizing, whatever you want to call it. All flavors of the same thing. Here's your goal in this phase. It's really to project impact. So in the second step, identify, you by now have identified maybe 5 to 10 different potentially impactful experiments or new features or whatever you want to call it. You have a short list. Now it's important that you market size or opportunity size each one. And you need to come out of this with a general ballpark of what you expect that feature to bring into the company, whether it's revenue or whatever goal or metric you're optimizing for, right? Maybe it's sessions, maybe it's click-through rates, maybe it's average revenue per user, whatever it is, make sure you're projecting that impact. And I always find it really helpful to do a high and low confidence so that you can look at different slices of the impact. We don't know how it's going to go, but here's how we think it could go in the worst, in a conservative estimate. And in a best case scenario, here's how we think it could land. So, every product manager should be able to do this themselves. It's, kind of using a little bit of guesstimation, assumptions, pulling data that we already have. But if you have business operations, if you have data science, if you have other analysts to utilize, please do, because it'll just make your estimates a bit better and they can help spot check your assumptions. Secondly, you need to prioritize this list, right? So you have this list and you should prioritize it based on the level of effort with the impact. Does it also align with your goals and mission, right? Is this something that is going to cost a lot on the investment side in terms of engineering hours or time or money? And what is that expected impact? So you should be able to have a list that you can look to see what this impact could look like. And then on the last piece, the last phase of this UI/me framework is the execution. Basically just get to work, right? Go out and build these things. Go out and experiment. And some tips and traps on the last piece here. Make sure you validate your assumptions, right? Do experiments, actually try to test your hypotheses, try to test these different opportunities so that you can know if you're on the right track. Be quick to move on. This one can be tough, but it's really important to, essentially trim the fat and continue to move on if something isn't working. Reduce the scope when you can, right? This is important because your goal isn't to build the perfect solution for all of these opportunities. Your goal is to see if this is a lever, this is a heuristic, this is a improvement that can meaningfully drive impact. Does it actually improve the experience? Does it solve a problem? You can go back and polish things and make it look and feel and do incredible things. But for a lot of products that we end up building anyway, 90% of the value is in those kind of core MVP features anyway. Some traps, right? What are some common mistakes? Always focus on the problem that you're trying to solve rather than the solution. So in all of these kind of opportunities that you're going to be identifying, at the root, there is some problem, there's some job to be done, there's something that you're solving. So make sure you're not just focusing and optimizing for some idea, but you're actually getting to the root of the problem so that you can pivot and potentially test other things too. So don't get tunnel vision either. I mentioned in the beginning, focus on goals and on your metrics and on problems, but make sure you're solving these real problems and not just optimizing for a number. Don't under-communicate. I think this goes without saying, but if you're testing a lot of different experiments, it'll be important that people understand the motivations and why you're doing something. Otherwise, to an outsider within your company, it could seem like you're just doing a bunch of random things. And the last one is really important. Trust, but also verify your results. Some of these ideas might be crazy. Some of them might be new, some of them might be kind of out of left field. And you need to make sure that you have the right experimentation tooling set up to be able to have confidence in the data that's coming in, and always make sure that you actually go back through the product, do some research, reach out to some users who went through these new flows to make sure that everything you're seeing matches up and lines up. So let's quickly run through a few case studies from my time at Facebook. The goal was to increase sharing for birthdays and basically to get more people to share happy birthday wishes. So the first thing I did was I went through the UI/me process. I looked at all of the data, what countries, the platform, what does the funnel look like? And then what I really started to do was dig into the product and research kind of how people were using it and what that all looked like. I ended up discovering through some data digging that many people actually hid their birthdays from their friends. It wasn't visible. And I pulled the number of people who were in that state, and it was quite a lot, many, many, many millions. I won't go into the very specifics, but many millions. And so this is where that kind of light bulb went off. And I thought, what if we could unlock that inventory and help those people who had hidden their birthdays to make them public? Okay. And so at the root of this, there was a problem, right? Why were people in this state, and do we want to get them out of that? What is the hypothesis there? So I did the market sizing, and we, really came up with a pretty big number if we could move people into this more public sharing state. We ended up with a 50% conversion rate. And we did some research, and we kind of internally thought about this too. And what we realized with this really high conversion rate is that some people intentionally had set this as private, but many, many others accidentally hid their birthday privacy. And our hypothesis was that they did this through one of these privacy checkups, okay? And the other thing that we did is we wanted to also make sure that for the people who intentionally hid it, was it because of their age being a concern? So what we also did was iterated on the initial design and told people, hey, we're going to keep your age hidden, but allow your friends to wish you happy birthdays. This led to over 250 million additional birthdays every year. So pretty massive. So this next opportunity was a really, really small optimization. Our goal was to increase wall posts or original sharing. And I started again by looking at all of the data. Where do people share? Where do people, go through with wall posting? Is it from feed? Is it from profile? What are they posting, etc.? Came out with a couple different ideas, and one of them was actually just to optimize the ghost text or the hint text within the product. And all we did was tested a few different strings to optimize this hint text and make it more clear. So the two words that I added were to first name, and this led to over 600,000 updates per day. And at the core of this, the problem was that it wasn't always clear whose wall you were writing on. Some people were confused, and clearly the data shows that when we clarified the intent and the recipient, everyone had a better experience. And so this was a very small change, but since it had high distribution, it actually led to really big impact. So let's wrap this up. What are the key takeaways? Understand your goal and your product. That is the key component here. And then start using the framework, but be flexible. Your whole goal with this is to just come up with a list that makes sense, that you can test to see if these opportunities can improve the product. On the execution side, consolidate your workflow and keep it clean. Share it out, but make sure you're not creating hundreds of different documents. Solve a real problem and don't just optimize for a metric. And in this kind of lecture, we've talked a little bit about the framework and all these other things. Of course, there are many different opportunities to improve your product, and not all of them will move metrics, right? But this lecture was about the ones that do. And don't worry about being super exhaustive. You don't need to turn over every rock to find every piece of data about your product. You don't need to learn every single flow or every single user segment. What you do need to do is understand the goals and get a list that you feel comfortable with on the data and on the opportunity side, but don't feel like you need to be exhaustive, because there will always be additional opportunities. And you can do this more than once. Rely on your cross-functional partners to help not only with the workload, but also be informed and really to provide input. because they will have done research before. They will have been around the company and seen what has worked, what hasn't. They will have great ideas. And then lastly, always trust but verify your results. So happy to take questions. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and I will be happy to help out. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much.